Welcome to another edition of the Two World Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jacob, and I have with me today.
I am Barney.
And Barney and I are really looking forward to opening up to you the behind the scenes aspect of our work. And so we'll be sharing a little bit about what it is that we do, how we prepare for that, what it looks like when you pull back the curtain and see what are the maybe more mundane tasks or aspects of getting ready for our work, and then perhaps even how we find meaning in the whole aspect of starting a task and bringing it to completion, even when it's from a private setting or behind the scenes setting to a more public setting or presentation. And so that's something we're really looking forward to sharing with you. And it's something we haven't really delved into yet on our podcast very deeply. So this will be new and interesting. So Barney, just to get us started, before we started recording, you mentioned that you were biking and this idea came to you. Do you want to give us a little bit more background of that story and how this emerged for you in your own thinking?
Yeah, it was just it was on my commute between my house and the train station, and I knew that today was podcast day, and I was wondering what topics might be good topics, and I think you sometimes get the inspiration, or you feel kind of a tugging in your heart of what might be an interesting topic, and I actually kind of had this idea, touching on this idea, maybe from our even third or fourth episode. I remember it was just a comment that you made on the side where you said that you were having questions, that you were chatting with some of the people when you were in Israel, and you had some questions, and the people said to you, those kind of questions are ones that you shouldn't just try to delve into, as an aside or as a hobby or as, something in your free time. But they said, we're really sure that you should go to seminary. And it got me thinking about, there's so much that a pastor does that that we don't see, that we don't think about in their normal work week. I think in my case, especially now with parents not really being able to see our classes so often because of just the being careful of COVID and whatnot. I wonder too if they how much they understand that happens in our classes, and maybe what it's like to be a teacher and preparing for class each week. And so I thought it probably is interesting for each other and for our listeners to hear, exactly like you said, pull back the curtain a bit and see kind of the how the machine works when we're going through our Monday through Friday, or Tuesday through Sunday lives, in fact.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm fascinated to hear a little bit more from your perspective being a teacher. I remember when I visited with you, you showing me the classroom when you were teaching at the university. And then you showed me a poster of some upcoming classes. And there were some really creative things that you had put in there, even in the wording of the class description. And it made me think, oh, wow, there's a full creative process that goes on for you as you're selecting a course. And in your new setting where you're teaching, I'm sure there's lots of decisions that go into each class session. And so it'll be really neat to delve into those as well. So maybe by way of kind of a launching off point, I have this sense that teaching for you has been really a focal point since moving to Japan. And would you say that it was on your radar before moving to Japan, or is that something that emerged more once you got there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Even when I was taking classes at Goshen in my first year there, I did start on like including education in in my total I guess course of study, and then then my oldest brother was a teacher, my sister's a teacher, and my mom's sister, so my aunt and cousins, so teachers, lots of teachers around me, and it seemed like something that I think I would thought that I would really enjoy teaching, maybe thinking about high school or whatnot, because I enjoyed my history courses in high school so well. Um, and then I had the chance to actually kind of be in the teaching setting, shadowing a teacher. And then I thought maybe this isn't exactly what I had in mind. And I realized I was enjoying just the academic aspect of learning about history more, thinking about history and looking at it in different ways. And then I just focused on that, and in my other elective courses explored other interests as well. And it's true. I think that a lot of, I don't know if there's a stigma or if there's just kind of a general feel one way or another, but I think that a lot of people, when you meet expats here in Japan, there's kind of the thought, oh well, of course you're an English teacher because that's the most available job. But even if I had my pick of other jobs, I really would want to have this job, being an English teacher, either at the university level or where I am now, working with kids. And it's very rewarding. It's very fulfilling. So I really would choose this job over any of the other ones, I believe.
That's really interesting, Barney. I have, I guess I might say, a somewhat similar story to yours in the sense that when I was finishing up in undergraduate, I had studied a completely different discipline than theology or biblical studies or ministry. But I had a lot of interests in that. And so my wife, Katie, and other people in my life were encouraging me to discern if maybe seminary would be a good fit. Like you said, those
Hmm.
other students that I met in Israel were among the people who said, you should really think about seminary. But when I went into seminary, like you, there was a stigma, I guess you could say, in my mind with being a pastor.
Uh-huh.
I mean, not like it was a negative stigma, but there was a lot that mantle or that calling or that job entailed, that I thought, well, that involves a lot of dimensions, and there was almost, I don't know if I'm going to say a weightiness, but I was apprehensive to step into that. Um, but I loved reading about theology and studying biblical languages and studying the Bible, and so I thought, oh, it would be great to go an academic route, and so I did biblical studies and I got a master's in biblical studies, and then I went on for a doctorate in Christian theology, and I really was thinking my trajectory was more into academia. But then, as Pastor Ralph finished his time at Worcester, and the church was looking for an interim, and they invited me to apply for that, I really fell in love with pastoring and really enjoyed it and found it to be fulfilling. And so maybe like your story where you start out like, I'm not sure if that's for me, I'll do some related area or go in a slightly different direction. But then as you get the experience, and it kind of changes your view on it, and then you grow to love it and embrace that as part of your calling or identity for that season. And um, so could you unpack a little bit for how the change happened in you, where you started to enjoy teaching or you came around to the idea?
Yeah, I think that I enjoyed. So the first time that I was teaching um, was it was with a church in western, kind of the western area, just outside of Tokyo, near Yokohama. And then I ended up I would work at kind of two different churches during the week. And at one of the churches that I worked at, the wife of the pastor was in charge of teaching the kids classes, and she would ask me to help, like, act out or help illustrate or help kind of tell like the Bible portion of the lesson each week. And it was interesting. I was just doing what I thought I could do to help out. And she kept complimenting and kept saying that me and kept saying, "You, wow, you really have a gift for this, and you really do such a great job with like acting and making it visual and making it accessible for the kids, and they really seem to enjoy this." And at that time, I had no clue. I really didn't think that I worked well with kids at all, and that was really an affirmation that I hadn't expected. And um, then when I started working at the kindergarten where I am now, and that was my first like real job there, I realized that I just really enjoyed, um, that the energy that the kids have, and not that it's easy, but like kind of teaching the classes was coming naturally for me. I felt like, and I enjoyed like the chance to, I don't know, I sometimes I think that I'm probably still a little bit childish on the inside, so I enjoyed the chance to kind of let that out in the way that I was teaching.
Amen to that, Barney. I feel the
Thank you.
same way. I think that's a good thing. So
Yeah.
nurture that, enjoy that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And then as far as teaching at the university level, um yeah, like you said, the creativity, the openness, I was so glad the other teachers, that some of the teachers that I was sitting with when we were learning of the way that our course director had mapped out our classes, the other teachers were a little bit worried that there was no textbook at all. But I loved that. I loved the freedom that we were allowed, and the students really appreciated that too. They even actually even now they still tell us that there are no classes like the class that I was teaching and some of the others of us were teaching, just because we just took whatever we wanted and probably looked at things in such a different way from the other kind of standard, course that other perspective that other teachers were approaching things from. That I think that, and the creativity and whatnot, just being able to kind of, I think in a way, I feel that we were more transparent with our, and honest and genuine with our students, not trying to feel like you know, we're the professor, listen to us, but more like, we're in this with you. And that I think was something that was rewarding, to be able to use the creativity and to have that interaction with the students. So it's really such a, mixing with creativity and mixing with interaction with the people that we're working with. That's something that's just so fulfilling about this job, and I think maybe not something that maybe everyone experiences, or that everyone maybe sees, whether as a teacher or as a student, and so I really am thankful for that.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, it feels like if there is an outlet for your creativity, then what you do is so much more fulfilling. Like there's that often said um, bit of advice: if you love what you do, you'll never have to work a day in your life. That sense
Yeah.
of it,
Uh-huh.
enjoying and having an outlet for your creativity when it's expressed in your work makes it um, just feel lighter and sustainable and a good investment of time throughout life. And so that's fascinating to me. Um, and I would say that there is a lot of connection with what you shared to my own experience with pastoring. Um, there are many aspects to the role of a pastor, and there is a space for that creativity and the playfulness. So um, part of it is centered in the development and growth of relationships. And so in the pastoral role, is a lot of relationship building within a community, a congregation, and that can happen within meetings, or it can happen in activities and events, or just one-on-one when you're visiting with people. And I think that people really enjoy times to be able to laugh and have fun and um, do interesting activities together. And so I've found that creativity and laughter play a big role in what I'm doing as a pastor in those settings. I get to work on interchurch relationships with partnering with other congregations in our community. And I have a pastor peer group. And if I may, I'll just share a picture of them real quickly. And we spent a lot of time um, planning together and thinking of how we can partner, but we also spent a lot of time laughing and enjoying each other's company. And so um, I think that collegiality and sense of enjoyment is enhanced by creativity and humor. And I'll just mention too that part of the behind the scenes work ministry is um, knowing how to navigate um, differences and work through differences of approach, differences of opinion, and sometimes relate to like cultural diversity. How do we show hospitality, make space for the variety of cultures and outlooks that our pastor peers are all bringing to the table when we plan events? And so in this picture, you can see several of my peers. In the center there is Pastor Benaiah, who is serving at Akron Swahili Mennonite Church. And he is a Congolese refugee who settled here in the United States probably close to 5 years ago. And he just recently was licensed this past October in Ohio Conference, where I serve. And you can see several of my other peers. You might know some of them,
Yes.
Barney.
I was going to say we have four of our past guests here.
Four of our past guests. We see Thomas, who was on here to talk about the Akron Swahili Mennonite Church and how we're forging partnership with them. Then beside him is Sean, who was on our podcast to talk about Volkswagens. Right. And then Bill Seymour, right. Who's there to the right of the photo to talk about the Monday meal program that Orville Mennonite does. So yeah, so some of our friends of this podcast too are on here. So anyway, but I just want to say that building relationship, meetings, forging ties and building bridges between the local church where one is serving and other churches is a really important part of the work that a pastor does. And so there needs to be time set aside for that, which involves time for meetings, time for extra activities, and or just a real sense of venturing out and meeting in different locations, with these peers. And then I would also like to know, just stopping with my story for a bit and then bouncing back to yours, like what are the relationships that you've developed through teaching? Are there some behind the scenes dynamics there that you might share about that have nurtured you or been a part of your role as a teacher?
Yeah, I believe that thankfully at my my current job, I don't have the chance to, this isn't the thankful part. Although I don't have the chance to really interact with the teachers of the classes that I'm teaching in when I'm at different kindergartens. Thankfully, I do have the chance to maybe meet with them a little bit here and there in the staff room. And I have the chance to spend time with, I guess you would say, like the principal or like some of the other administrative staff. And yeah, I've been really grateful. Again, this was something that I didn't really know what I was getting into, and I was just making it up as I was going along. And some of them have given me wonderful advice about how to kind of maybe adjust my style of teaching in a way that like makes it more sustainable, so I wouldn't get so tired out so easily, or that my voice, I wouldn't have to put so much use into my voice so much, but still be able to get a good volume and engagement with students, and also support in a way that when I feel like, wait, I don't know if this is going to work today, or if that, how well did that go, because I think that probably, um, we are our own worst critic, right? And then hearing this unsolicited support, that just kind of comes at the right moment from the other teachers or the staff, is really, uh, that's something that is just something that you really need on those days. And yeah, that's really welcome support. And then at my main school where I work, where I have a lot more interaction with the other teachers there, throughout the day, and and sitting down and just chatting about our lives, knowing how each other, like a little bit about each other's background, really feeling makes it feel like it is a nice small family, that we're all working together and go supporting each other, even though we're teaching different subjects. And really, you often hear that in Japan, like the company is like your outside family. That is, the company is really held in such esteem as equal to family. And this job that I have is just naturally so, that we all really love what we're doing, and really have a real desire for the success of what we're teaching, and just for the success of the students as well. I think it's this being able to teach small kids, and over a number of years, from, since kindergarten starts at age 3 here in Japan, and it goes until 6. But some students we start teaching from 2, and we teach them even into the 6th grade. So that's like 10 years that we have the chance to see these students grow and develop, and be able to do different things. And also, you see how their interest changes as they get older. And you see different parts of their personality develop, and you be a part of that. And it's that's really a fun part, I think. And it makes me think, when I was talking earlier, I thought about the fact that you and I both do a lot of teaching in what we do. And then hearing your story just now, and then as I'm talking to the people I interact with, however, are a real set of students, either kindergarten or elementary, or and then their parents. But as a pastor, you have to, um, as part of, like, outside of the church, as kind of being as your responsibility for caring for the members of the community and of the congregation. um, you deal with a really wide range of ages. How is that? What are maybe some of the um, different ways that you have to approach that aspect of your work? I'm curious about.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Um, well, I think it helps um, to try to have a posture of listening and engagement and presence with whomever the other person is that you're working with or talking with. And so for our youngest members, like elementary age or going into middle school, and um, I love to just ask them what their hobbies are and what shows they're into, or games or movies or toys that they like, and just kind of celebrate and show interest in what they're passionate about. And maybe as a teacher, at times you have opportunities to ask your students what they're into, but I think sometimes just asking about their interests and hobbies can open up a door and make space for them to share, because often people get excited about what their hobbies are or their passions are. Um, and then um, maybe for the older members in our congregation, I like to ask about their life story, lessons that they've learned, memories that they have about the community of Worcester Mennonite Church, or ask about their family. I actually find it really interesting to hear the stories of our older members, because there's a lot of wisdom and insight. And so And if we're talking about behind the scenes, what that can look like, it can be visiting a person in their home, or in some cases, if they're in a hospital or a nursing home or another space, going to give them support, and then also taking time to listen and really try to pray for them and be with them, and if they're going through a difficult time. But when it's just sharing in their home, it's just making space and slowing down and listening to their story and really being present and just enjoying that, taking time to enjoy that. And then um, maybe members of the community who are um, coming to a lot of the activities that we offer, uh, or connecting over certain like social events that we do. I guess I get to know them through doing life together, through joint activities. Some of the people in our congregation have similar hobbies to me. So once again,
Mm-hmm.
even as an
Mm-hmm.
adult, you can go back to
Mm-hmm.
those. But then, there is a lot of connection that happens when members of the community come together around things of faith, like studying the Bible together or praying together for a prayer group. And so every Wednesday on Zoom, I meet with two members of our congregation, and we just read a scripture, then we share some prayer requests that we're aware of, and then we pray. And that's a very important part of my week. And it's meaningful just for the three of us to gather and do that. I regularly meet with a group of people, and I'll share a picture right now, if I
Mm-hmm.
may, who um, are involved with thinking about the future of our church, and thinking about where is God calling us to go. And this team is called a visioning team. And this is a picture of us meeting to discuss uh, the unique gifts and opportunities that our church has right now in this season, and what we want to move towards and how we do that. And are there things that we need to let go of from the past that we used to emphasize and now maybe don't have as much energy for? How do we balance that? And so we're talking through a number of those issues here in this picture. And we're working with an outside consultant named Jeannie Zimmerly Yancey. You can see her
Mm-hmm.
doing some things there at the dry erase board, but she has had a lot of great, insightful questions for us. And I think we've met with her 3 times, and each time we've learned something new, and it's been very valuable. And so these are some of my fellow peers. Shaquez in the picture there in the
Mm-hmm.
yellow shirt, who is works at our church as our office associate, and then next to her, Julie, who's
Mm-hmm.
one of our elders. And then it's a little bit blocked by the camera shots of us, but that third person is Katie. Let me see here if I can minimize so you can see a little bit better. And Katie Miller, who is also part of our visioning team. And so this is just an example of a subset of our congregation, but I get to know these people when we have these meetings, and we often try to spend a little time sharing before the meeting starts about what's going on in our lives. And over time, when you hear people's prayer requests or what's going on in their lives, and you take time to pray for one another, listen to one another, you get to know each other pretty well. And so I think each age brings a unique challenge and a unique blessing to the church life. The challenge is like, how do we keep making space for the all ages to feel engaged and connected, and give good entry points for that and our culture as a church? But then also the blessing is too, like when these each individual from different age groups are connected, they have such an insight, and they bring such a unique energy and wisdom to our life together. So yeah, those would be some of my thoughts related to that. Yeah, I was kind of wondering if we could talk a little bit from start to finish
Mm-hmm.
of the nuts and bolts of working on a lesson,
Mm.
honing it, and bringing it to the presentation phase where you deliver it to your students. And maybe if you, and that's the very public part when you deliver it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want, you can even follow it through to like, and then when you go back and you reassess how it went, or you grade their
Mm-hmm.
work or whatever. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
walk us through like, what are the behind the scenes things for you in the lesson plan process all the way up through delivery? Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that I can kind of talk about how things went for both grade levels. Um, it's much easier to talk about, well, in a way, to talk about the children that I teach. We have just kind of like a monthly theme, and then I think about what um, what is it that I want them to be able to do, because since their parents, um, often, after each lesson, we explain to the parents what we did, but we sometimes hear that the parents say, they ask their children, what did you do in class today? And the children have, just because they're so young, have trouble expressing, what they did. And so I kind of have um, a sense. I always approach everything from thinking about the goal, thinking about where I hope that they can be in by March. Since our school year starts in April, and and I want them to not just learn English, but I want them to be able to learn feeling comfortable, like being in front of their classmates, and also to feel confidence. And so I incorporate a lot of like peer teaching, so instead of me, once I know that they're comfortable, instead of me doing the alphabet, doing the flashcards, I pick someone in the class to do the flashcards instead. um and and it's nice for them because it really gets everyone engaged, because everyone wants to do it, and then um, they can feel confident and they can get the experience of being in front of their classmates. But it also lets me see um, where they are in their learning. Is it going very smoothly for them? Are they unsure of which letter they're showing or something like that? And it helps me to plan the next lesson of how to approach them with that. And I try to think, you know, um, I always try to tie something into their real life experience. So, like if we talk about the days of the week, what day is today, what day was tomorrow, things like that, things that they can relate to. um, if we do the alphabet, after we do the alphabet, how about spelling your name? Something that makes sense, something that goes a little bit deeper. So when I plan through what we're doing, each lesson, I try to think of some way that that I can relate what we're learning to their life around them, because in their everyday lives, they don't have access, they don't have exposure to English um, in general. So how can I find a way to bridge it to their home culture and their home language? And we used to do a lot more. I used to try to do like a lot of pair work as well, but it's harder now, just because of the way that we have to set up the classroom, just for being careful. Um, and yeah, but it's so, like I said, in that way, it's a lot easier. The planning is much more straightforward. What are kind of the core things that we need to do, and then where do I want to end up, um, um, long term, but also short term as well. Um, with the programming class that I teach, which is it's just programming, but it happens to be in English, then there's a lot more thinking of how can I um, help them to understand, sticking as much to speaking English as possible. How can I help them to understand the concepts that they're learning in the puzzles that they're solving, and also the robots that they're building, or the programs that they're writing, to help it to make sense, and also to be fun, and for them to hopefully forget that they're actually listening to me speak in English, and then just to be able to do it well, and then unconsciously realize that they're listening to all of these instructions in English. And so that requires a lot of planning. And I make videos, like kind of flipped classroom. I prepare a lot of things before the class starts for them to go through, so that they can see a preview of what we'll do, and vocabulary worksheets and things like that for them to do. But at the university level, I can kind of share a screen here, a photo here in a little bit. But one thing that's always in the back of our mind, which I think is really a behind the scenes thing, is can I get any research out of this? And eventually make it into a paper, you know. And but in the creativity of what we needed and working together, myself and Sean, and then two of the Japanese teachers, we had our own kind of creative outlet where we would spend time together, usually after lunch, and just like kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And the photo that I'm sharing here is a scoreboard that we had. So that this is, if you're familiar with match play in golf, this is our scoreboard here for it was always Team USA versus Team Japan, and we had a nice little tin that acted as the hole, and then we had access to the entire floor that we were on. There were no other teachers on the floor, so we designed all kinds of golf holes that we would go through, and as you could see, sometimes it would take up to 16 or 18 strokes to complete the hole. And yeah, we team Japan always the total record 253 wins for Japan and 247 wins for America. So it's always very close, but Japan had the edge in overall tournaments by 3. But working this kind of off the wall thing into our daily activity kind of broke up the day and gave us a chance to kind of refresh and get our mental juice, our creative juices flowing again. And yeah, that thinking, how can we make this a class that we would want to be in, and also how can we design it in a way that it could be repeatable for other people and that we can get like real interesting data back from. So I really was a big fan of I'm trying to blank here. I was really a big fan of learning through projects, and I know that there is a term for this, and it has slipped my mind, which is, I'm sorry to say, but it is. Anyway, just the students work together as groups with less instruction from the teacher. They know their task, they know their goal, and then they work on it as they work on this project together using English as much as they can. And we designed it in a way that they would self-report and on themselves and on their group as a whole, so that we could get interesting data from that. And I believe that I came up with a good kind of data collection worksheet through that is I'm I'm working on this now. So this is another kind of behind the scene things of, even as a teacher now, how do I use my free time? And yeah, it is, I do have all of these things that I still want to work into papers, and as much as I can, I try to work on them here and there. But just the situation, when I was at university, I did have time for writing, but now it's finding time, outside of work to work on writing. So it goes much slower. But yeah, then coming up with the idea, coming up with the method, and then trying to make the lesson at the university level, using lots of PowerPoint, using lots of slides, making it engaging and making the slides themselves appealing, and also kind of being mindful of which level of student that I'm teaching. Do I need to add a lot more kind of sample phrases from them for them to learn from? Do I need to give more time for group discussion as and maybe more in-depth thoughts, questions, just because they can express more ideas at a higher level? And how can I adapt? How can I, which idea would, which maybe small project within class would make sense? I know one time after the protests early on in Virginia, and the one woman who ended up losing her life at that time, it was a good time for me to kind of compare and contrast how presidents responded to tragedy and different times in the US, and the speeches that they gave afterwards. And in the higher level, it was uh, thanks to the technology we have, it was a wonderful way to let the students see different examples. And then at the highest level, I had the chance for the students to put themselves in that situation and pretend that they were given a speech afterward, and to come, work together as a group and then have one person present a speech. So having a lot of things like that. Um, and then even sometimes, like one of the examples, maybe why the kids liked maybe our classes so well, I had classes, have small warm-up activities, like I had commonly misheard lyrics that I would print on one piece of paper. And at a table of 6 students, we would do the telephone game. And one person starts and whispers it to the next person around. And then the final people at each whiteboard have to write down what they thought that they heard. And then at the end of that, then I would play the actual song for them. And
Interesting.
yeah, a lot of times it was very, very far from the actual lyric, which is a commonly misheard lyric to
Yeah.
begin with.
Mm.
So
Oh,
so
that's
it
so
just compounded.
creative.
Yeah. hmm So thinking of ways to make sure you have enough time, but also um, teaching teaching language in a way that's built based on a topic, and then making sure that they can have time to practice the different skills, speaking and listening and writing, and maybe even reading a little bit as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. And as you were sharing there, I was hearing several things. One is that the part of you, even going back into undergrad, that loved research and academia is still engaged because you're still able to collect information and observe your teaching practices and publish. But then also the creative side and meeting your students where they are at the different levels you're teaching and finding um, extra strategies or ways to present learning English with new activities that are group based. That's so fascinating. Um, and maybe if I could just compare it to
Mhm.
a task that I would do, which would be preparing a sermon.
Mm.
Um, there are similar aspects for me in terms of if you want to say research or gathering information, reflecting on that, and then moving all the way into relating it to different the people I would consider in the audience or the who are part of the congregation. So um, is that an okay segue
Oh yeah,
to
I
yeah,
would love to hear.
yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, um, like a sermon is something that is part of the regular rhythm of the gathering of our community. And it's just a time to reflect together on scripture and to try to ask the question, um, how can we grow in this season of our life? How can we be more attuned to loving God? How can we be more attuned to loving our neighbors? And what are some ways that we can think differently about the world too in which we live? And so for sermons, what I'll do is I often will meet with a team of people in our church weeks in advance, and we put our heads together and we say, what are some topics that would be really beneficial for our church to hear right now? Um, and so we'll look at different ideas. Sometimes we'll look at a bunch of topics as they relate to like a certain book of the Bible, or sometimes we'll find a book like that a Christian author or someone has written. And I'll give you an example here, just like a book like Richard Foster's The Spirit of the Disciplines. And this could be a book that would have different um, aspects to how we live out our faith and how that relates to our practices. And we might relate those each week to a different practice and have a sermon on each one. Sometimes we'll do something like that. But I guess what I want to say is the sermon starts in the planning phase with a consideration of where our community is and what we think would be helpful for them to hear and engage with. And it will relate that question then to scripture. And so we try to select whether it's one book of the Bible that we're going to go through week after week in a season, or sometimes we'll use what's called the lectionary, which has different readings from the Bible for different times of the church year and sets them out in an orderly fashion and is used by many churches as in a broader sense in the larger church. Um, Sometimes we'll use that. Um, Sometimes we use a resource called the Leader Magazine, which for the Mennonite Church collects ideas and information and presents them to you for certain series throughout the years. So, but once we have our topic, then I'll go back to my office and I'll look at the scripture that we'll be using for that particular Sunday. And for me, it's really important to try to spend a lot of time reflecting on what is the text saying on its own terms to the best of my ability as we look at resources that help us understand the language it's using. So part of that will be as much as I can going back. If I'm in the New Testament, I have this really great resource. I don't know if it's displaying properly on
Mhm.
the screen.
Mhm.
That's an interlinear Greek English New Testament I like to use, or I have a software program that we used before
Mhm.
during Holy Week to read
Mhm.
Hebrew text. But for the Greek and Hebrew, I like to look at the passage and look at the terminology that's used, and I have a lot of resources to help me understand that. And then also looking at commentaries and dictionaries to understand historical context and more of the background for each passage. And then once I have a good sense of what the passage is speaking to, then I try to relate it and translate it to a more modern context and relate it to our lives and our life stories. And so sometimes that will involve thinking about examples from the life of the congregation of things we've done that seem to connect with what the passage is addressing. Or sometimes I'll share my own personal stories. And so I'll find pictures to share, to display during the message to illustrate the point. And then a really important part then is at the end of that, asking the question, so what does this mean for how we live and what we practice or what we do? And so then I try to focus towards the end, like, where can we go from here in light of this scripture, in light of how we've connected it with our life story? How will we live differently? And so, um, so to go through that whole process, I'm spending a lot of time reading in front of my computer, getting out books. But then I'll spend time in conversation. Sometimes I get the positive benefit of having small group meetings like our men's group at the church or our elders meeting, where I'll take the scripture that I'm going to preach on for Sunday and I'll ask them questions about it. What do you see in this passage? And I love getting feedback from other members in the congregation. You know, in our Anabaptist tradition, that's a big part of scriptural interpretation is what does
Mhm.
the gathered community feel about a passage? What emerges from the different voices in the community about its meaning? So I love to do that. So from start to finish, it involves a lot of reading and reflection, talking with people, gathering information. And then the final step is I put together a PowerPoint that will often have some pictures in it and maybe some questions or a few quotes that I can then share. And then when I get to the point of delivering the message, I've had a whole period where it's been kind of simmering and kind of percolating and going, just resting there in my mind. And I'm surprised sometimes when I get up front, I use a manuscript sometimes, or sometimes mostly just notes, like a bare outline. But I'm sometimes surprised at what emerges. Sometimes in the delivery, certain aspects are emphasized more than others. There's almost a dynamic way when working through the material, things emerge, particularly when you ask questions to the congregation and invite their feedback. Um, so asking questions like, what does the word anxiety mean for you, and how does it affect your life? And so just posing that question, people start saying things, and it unlocks new avenues or directions you can go with the scripture. And then sometimes you can make those connections spontaneously, but a lot of times um, in the delivery, it's just a really interesting experience to see, is this connecting with other people like it was connecting with me? And then also when you present something, other people can interpret it in different ways or hear it differently. And so afterwards, if you get a chance to talk with people, they say, oh, this part jumped out to me. And it's like, oh, that's so interesting. I hadn't even thought of it from that angle. Um, and sometimes most recently, this we've been doing this. There's even a chance for like a discussion group after a message, and so Maria led one of those this past Sunday, and that's a chance to debrief. So um, the process is fascinating in that getting ready is solitary in a lot of things. I'm reading, doing reflection behind the scenes, but then it is also communal in a lot of ways because you talk to people along the way and then you get to the point where you present it and then the community responds. So,
That yeah, that's fascinating to hear about the process. Had no idea. I've always wondered, how is it to be a pastor, and how is it with in what I was thinking, all of this pressure, because it felt like it's such a solitary thing, and I just had a vision of, like a pastor is sitting in, their office and waiting for inspiration, and then thinking, aha, now I know what I'll talk about this week, right? And then making the sermon from there, and then but hearing more in depth of how things work with planning it together with a group, and then in advance with time for you to really think about and reflect on that, the topic or how you want to approach it, or the scripture or whatnot, and then getting feedback, or hearing other people's perspectives, other people's ideas that maybe might not have occurred to you at a time, and then working that in to arrive at the final product, and then presenting and maybe even coming up with something different, going on a different avenue sometimes than what you even thought, or like you said, emphasizing things in a different way that maybe you thought, you end up emphasizing B more than A or something like that, when in your mind maybe you were thinking another way. I don't want to maybe put you on the spot or anything, but when I was listening to you, I had the thought of the movie called, and I guess it's also a book called, A Man Named Peter. Are you familiar with that?
no, I'm not. Please tell me.
Okay. I don't know his last name, but he was from Scotland, and he ended up being the chaplain of the US Senate. And it's a wonderful movie. And there's one scene that I remember really well, where he's working on his sermon or it's a message that he's going to deliver, I think at maybe a military academy or something, but maybe West Point, I think, or something. And he's struggling and struggling and struggling over what he wants to present to them. And he feels like he has the idea, and he feels like he has the direction that he wants to go, but and he even goes, I think, as far as to writing up the sermon, but he just has this feeling inside that it's all wrong, and it's just it just isn't going to work. And he ends up in the movie, I think in the book, which is in real life, that he ends up completely changing everything in it, and you can see later that it was really inspiration that led to this change, and it was just what the people needed to hear. um how do you deal with times? Do you have times where you feel like, I mean, myself as a teacher, I have had and have times where I feel like I'm trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and just trying to, and it's not working. Do you, and I try to adjust from there, but do you have times, and how do you deal with those times where you are struggling to kind of get to where you get this scripture or this idea or this topic to where you want it to be?
Yes, absolutely. So there are several examples of that come up to me when it's related to a sermon. I have had that experience before where I prepared something and then I'm feeling a stirring, like there seems like there's something else that needs to be said, like a leading from God to go a different direction. And I've been able to do that. And I have the full support of our congregation and our worship team, the planners, for doing that. And that's always really rich and rewarding because I think that God works in many ways. Like he can work through the methodical, regular assembling of the group and the planning process and speaking on those levels. But then there are the more spur of the moment, spontaneous things that God does, that where another direction emerges, and it's like important to be able to recognize that and be open to that. And I think I see it especially even more than in sermons. I have had it in sermons, but I've seen it more frequently in church meetings or activities, when somebody shares something hard or something important in their life, and there's like an agenda of things to get done. Sometimes when that happens, it's just like you have to be open and shift and say, what
Mhm.
this person has just shared is more important than finishing this agenda. Let's all just spend time focusing on them, or praying for them, or supporting them, encouraging them. Sometimes in a worship service, somebody shared something very hard during the prayer time, the sharing time, and we've just stopped what we were doing, and people got near them and gathered around them to pray. And I think we have to be open to times when our plans are interrupted and a greater need emerges that we didn't know about ahead of time, and just say, what, um, this is an opportunity where God can work. And so there is always, I think, in ministry, that potential for something spontaneous to happen. And I think
Mhm.
um, it sometimes can be scary or surprising or catch us off guard. But as much as we can, I think we need to try to be open and nimble and willing to engage that when it emerges, because often it's a richer, fuller, deeper result when we can open up to God in that way. So, um, yeah, um, maybe the sermon or the message is one of the more common things that people think of, just kind of like
Mhm.
uh, they would think of a lesson in relation
Mhm.
to the vocation of a teacher. But then there are maybe behind the scenes things that people don't think about. And so I wanted to ask, like, can you get into the mundane, nitty gritty aspects about being a teacher,
Mhm.
like grading, or like t- like what program do you know type your lesson notes in? Like
Mhm.
what are some of the things that people would never know or see, but they are part of your practice and what you do as a teacher? And then maybe after you share, like I could share a few of those from the
Mhm.
perspective of a
Mhm.
pastor. So
Yeah, great. Yeah. Um, yeah, I wonder how much harder I think things were in the past. I think we really benefit from um, having like being able to make online quizzes very easily, or have submission forms, so that it's easier for students to kind of submit the work that they've done, um, or like kind of comprehension quizzes that you can kind of program the correct answer beforehand, so that when students are filling them out, then it's kind of graded for you already. Um, but but yeah, I think the I'm still not remembering this term, but the one in the university, I project-based learning. There it is. The project-based learning unit that I always did, and I always made sure to do, was kind of like an adaptation of the Model UN. And we challenged the students as a group. They could choose their own groups to work hard and think of one of they chose the topic. We let them vote on the topic that they would um, debate and present on, and then kind of try to find a resolution for. And yeah, that coming up with a rubric for that was fair, and that helped the students know how to get a full score, and what would end up taking points away from their presentation. That was such a giant challenge. And because there are so many things, it's hard to do the first time or second time, because there's so many unexpected things that maybe you miss, or assumptions that you made, or things that seem clear to you but maybe don't seem clear to them, and then you don't want to kind of change things on the fly. So making sure that you have everything very clearly spelled out as far as how to submit things, how to, what um, type of file to submit. Some students work on Apple, on MacBooks or something, but and then I think maybe they use Keynotes or something, but I can't display that program on my school computer because it's a Windows. And sometimes they submit their file as presentation 01, and I don't know who you are because they didn't write their name in the email. And sometimes they don't send the email until 3 minutes before it's their turn. And so these unexpected things that like seem natural, seem obvious to you, because as a person I've always titled my files, and I'm always signing my name in an email, and I'm always using a subject line. But it doesn't necessarily occur to these students who are fresh out of high school, where they didn't have a lot of exposure with writing emails or making presentations. And so then you realize that in this rubric, you have to say, use high quality images. Don't use images that say, um, RF123 all over them, that have these watermarks that obviously you just copied and pasted something without thinking it. Make sure that the font size is large enough to read and not an 18-point font because it's super tiny on the screen. And don't have, I learned this hard way, don't have animated GIFs in your presentation because this is supposed to be the Model UN. And I don't think the delegation from your country would have an animated GIF of Olaf pulling his head off. So, so you work these things into the rubric so that they understand this is very acceptable. This is too busy. This will lose you points. But then, and having a set time, for the presentation, because we have to get through everyone's presentation in the class period or two. But I had the benefit of working with another teacher of team teaching. And so he and I both had our rubrics, and we both had our grading sheets, and we both were careful to pay close attention to the presentation style, use of notes, things like that, and the content. Did they really present something in the end? And then we could give it a grade out of however many points, and then we discussed together how we felt, and we just ended up kind of averaging our grades, the scores that we gave them. And it was interesting to see that in one of the in one of the bits of research that I designed with the self-reporting, we could see that the classes that were reporting that they were speaking more English and being more engaged, it also worked out that, of course, they ended up having the higher scores, which, it makes sense, but it doesn't always necessarily work out that way. And this is the other thing, the really nitty gritty, and also the thing that I'm thankful for now in terms of technology is we can use the IBM program, the SPSS, to crunch these numbers instead of having to have gone through however many statistics classes in graduate school.
Yes.
And but it's not, even though we have this program, it can look at our data from so many different angles. So we have to ask the question, what do we do with this data? How do we look at this data? Are we looking at it in the right way? Are we trying to find a correlation, a relationship between this and this, but we shouldn't be defining it as just raw numbers, or we shouldn't be defining it as yes or no. How do we take all of these data and put it into the program so that it makes sense? And which analysis of the data do we want to end up using? There are so many different ways to look at these data, and then do we want to a forest point. How do we want to plot the data? How do we want to present it? Does it look better as a bar graph or as a pie chart or as a best fit line? Things like that. How does it make sense? So that when we finally get done with the teaching, how do we do this? How do we make it so it makes sense? And that it tells us something. It tells us whether what we thought ended up being the right result or not. I think, yeah, if I would have just presented, I found this, as I was processing the data, just presenting it as averages, they graded themselves on a scale of 0 to 5 of how engaged they were and how much English they were using. If I just presented it averages between the control class, which was just a normal lesson using TED Talks, and then as the project-based learning class, then the numbers are very, very close. But when we really delve into the numbers and see it ask the program to show us the data in relationship-wise on a deeper level, then we really came up with really interesting things that emerged from there. And we could come up with kind of even a little formula to kind of predict things based on students and how they viewed themselves and how they viewed each other. And that is interesting to see the final result. And I always was bothering the people around me to say, wow, look at this result that I got. This is really interesting when you look at it this way. And then my one coworker, Yusuke Hayasaka, he was really interested in this too. And he was always so kind to listen to me and to hear what I had to say, and always was very genuinely interested. But then finally from there, then I didn't want to dig this out, but in the closet right over here, I have a giant box of articles that you have to print out. In my case, I prefer printing them, but sometimes I read them online and then find what you need from there to support you finally writing the final study that you hope to get published. And yeah, and also in this case, we asked the students 3 questions. What's something that you learned? What's something that you want to learn more about from each class? We did this in every single class. And what is something that is there anything that you had wished you had learned instead? And then you have to take these comments and quantify them and then kind of group them and things like that. And reassuringly, this was amidst all of this, kind of technical speak here of, gathering data and analyzing data and whatnot. It was very, very nice that there were so few comments about what they had wished they had learned instead. And those were only things like, one person said, how do I get a better sleep? Night sleep, things like that. So unrelated to anything that we should take seriously. And it was very reassuring when they said, what are some things that you wanted to learn more about? That they wrote a lot of things related to our class and to things that were getting them on the final path. And I shared a number of these with my team teacher because he was a journalist as his career, and then he was teaching after he had retired. And so I think that he always felt a little bit I don't know, unqualified, or I think he was always a little bit hesitant, or maybe didn't feel so confident. And when I showed him all of these comments that the students had after a presentation that he did about his time in Afghanistan, working with the Taliban, reporting on the Taliban, and the kids said, he should do a TED Talk. We want to know more about this. And I think it just really helped him to feel confident and to kind of gain some self-assurance in that he also was a good teacher. And yeah, so that's a lot of the nitty-gritty of how it goes into coming up with a unit and getting it executed and finding out how to evaluate the students so that they feel that it was fair, um, and that they learned something from it as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking there, I was thinking, what are some equivalents in church life or ministry? And there is a mechanism for collecting feedback within our church's life. We do, we have regular meetings, 2 meetings a year, one in the fall and one in the spring. And it's not uncommon to, before one of those meetings, um, present a plan for the year. Like in the fall, often we'll present a ministry plan and we'll gather feedback from the congregation. Like, what do you think of this plan? How would you want to shape it? Um, what parts get you excited? What parts do you think are missing or are not exciting? And then in the spring meeting, we'll check in and say, how have we been doing
Mm,
with the plan? Have we been reaching our goals in the way that's satisfying for you? Are the things we're missing? Are the things you still like to get to before the end of the year? But in this particular season, we've gone a lot more in depth than that because I'd mentioned earlier we have a visioning team. And so we've asked the congregation at various points to gather for um, uh, together for activities, seminars, like reflection, times of reflection and sharing. And in each of them, we've presented in different ways um, questions about our life together, what we prioritize, what's working, what is not working so well, what do we want to see happen, what do we think are the needs in our church that still need to be met, what are the needs that are being met well, what about a broader community. We've had a lot of time to gather comments, and then what we've done is we've taken all those comments and responses to questions, and we've met as a visioning team and worked at distilling them into core principles, like what are the core ideas in our congregation around our what we understand to be our mission, and then what are the core ideas around like our vision for how we work at our mission, like our culture, and then what are some of the principles that guide our work. And so that was a really important part of the discernment work we've done this year, gathering that information, that data, as you say, and trying to interpret it and ask the right questions. And now we're getting close to the point of coming back to the congregation with a proposal to say, this is what we heard you say, and this is what we think it means. Does this resonate with you? And how would you like to shape it or not? At the very end here, is we would kind of affirm that for our direction into the future. Now, I'm saying all this, describing it, but to get through these various points, like to collect information like that, to distill it down, requires hours and hours of discussion and behind the scene work at meetings. I know personally, like even just collecting all the feedback, if you collect a bunch of papers that people have written on, somebody has to type those up. And then you have to correlate the comments, like how many comments do we get in this area and how many in that area. And you have to weigh these things. And so all that data collection and takes time, but there is a tremendous sense um, of representation and I guess you would say accurate description of where the congregation is when you take that much time to listen and hear from the congregation directly. So I think even in a ministry setting, collecting that type of feedback can be valuable. But I kind of, I was getting at it a little bit here, talking about typing up things, meeting, about getting ready for a meeting, developing a schedule and like finding a time that people can meet. Well, I wanted to kind of move into some of the more mundane things related to church ministry. And I have a picture here that I'd love to share with you. And this kind of gets at part of where I want to go next here. So let me see if I can share this here. Okay. In this picture, we can see another in the middle there, another friend of our podcast, Ken Baines,
yes.
who's one of our regular hosts for our Northern Exposure segments. And to his right, my son, Micah, and to his left, Peter Johnson, who is one of the elders at Worcester Mennonite. And what are they doing? They're setting up tables for church activity. And every activity requires setup. And it requires people being willing to drag tables around and pull chairs out. And um, there's a famous book written by Brother Lawrence, Practice of the Presence of God, where he talks about how even the mundane tasks of working in the kitchen can be opportunities to think of God's presence nearer, and to commune with God. And I feel like church ministry has so many things like this behind the scenes. A Sunday service, for example, requires
Mm.
the preparation of a bulletin. At least in our tradition, we use a bulletin.
Mhm.
So you have to collect all of the titles of the songs that are going to be sung that Sunday, the scripture that will be used, the people who are involved with the service, the announcements relating to the community. And you have to collect all these in a written publication and type them in. Our office associate, Shaquez, will work on this. And she uses the program publisher, and she assembles all these things. And then I'll be a second set of eyes, and we'll look at it, and we'll try to catch, do we get everything in there that needs to be in there this week? And they need to be printed and folded. And then an usher will arrive on Sunday morning and, turn on the lights and unlock the doors and get that stack of bulletins and be ready to hand them to people. And then as pastor, I have to be mindful of, okay, who are the people that are involved with the service this Sunday? Can we meet ahead of the service to pray and to see if all the loose ends are finalized so that everything runs smoothly? And there's so many behind the scenes things too in a service with our sound team and our audiovisual team that are working to get the live stream ready before service starts. And in all of this big cacophony of activity, you have to, like Brother Lawrence, stop at times and say, like, where is God in the midst of this? Can I be appreciative of God's presence even in this mundane work? Can I, as I'm setting up tables or putting chairs around the table, think of the people who are going to sit in those chairs and pray for them or be grateful for them? When I'm looking at the bulletin with Shaquez, or when I'm getting something ready and printed out for a pastor's meeting that I have with my peers, or for an elders meeting, can I think of the people I'm going to hand that paper to? Can I slow down enough to be grateful that there are people who are interested in talking about this stuff with me to help me? I mean, these are all vital things to ministry, because if you don't take that time and space, I think after a while, it can feel like a grind. Like the small, subtle things can chip away at your joy or the joy of the work. And I'm not saying like all the time that I'm always 100% practicing mindfulness and gratitude when I'm doing behind the scenes things. But I think that part of ministry is not just the activity, but the way it's done. And so even setting up can be an opportunity to be mindful and grateful to God, and try to consider that as part of the ministry itself. And so even though it's behind the scenes, I think that's important. I was listening to a podcast recently with John Mark Comer. He is the author of a book called The Relentless Elimination of Hurry. And he does a 10-part podcast with another author about these very things, about in ministry, how do you slow down and find God's presence in the midst of the busyness and all that's happening? And they talk about this idea of obscurity. I think it's an older concept, going back maybe even to Catholic spirituality and monasticism. But the idea is that some of the things that you do in life, it's good for them to be done anonymously, that nobody knows you're doing them. No, there's no credit or accolades given, that it's just something you do behind the scenes quietly. And that is this kind of, I guess you would say, value of working in obscurity, or in humility, just doing what you're doing because you feel it's the thing to do. It's kind of its own reward, serving God in that way. And so I guess I might just put that before our listeners too, that sometimes in life, the behind the scenes work isn't glamorous, but can we make space to find something meaningful, even in that part of the task where, we can sense God's presence with us as we do it, or realize, even though we're not being seen, that there is value in serving and in doing that. And so it's not easy. I'm not trying to say that will always feel that way, but it is a good thought, I think, to sometimes consider, okay, even if this is a behind the scenes thing, it still has a value and worth.
It's yeah, it's so interesting to hear um, the outline or the flow of how it is to get ready for the service and how it really seems like you could easily get lost in kind of why you're doing it in the first place because you're so busy trying to get almost feels like a production, ready to go. I mean, it is a production. There's a lot of that you have to get ready, and I love you hearing that. Uh, it's so important to take time to think about the different parts of it, the small parts, the small pieces that go together to make it up, and to pause and think about um, why are we meeting at church today? Why are people coming here today? And to remember the most important thing about that, um, and right, meeting in God's presence, and and this kind of changes another maybe idea or image or thought that I have of what it is to be a pastor, because a lot of times you think of the pastor being the leader of the church, the one who's in charge, the one who's leading the church, and hearing all throughout today, hearing your story and the way that Worcester Mennonite is running, I see that it's not it's not one person. It's always like you say, sticking with in a way sticking with the Mennonite tradition of always including so many people in the whole process, and not one person saying this is the way that we're doing things and or this is the path that we're going down. But exactly, I remember reading one of John Roth's books about one of the series he has on the Mennonites, and how saying how in the Mennonite tradition, one thing that we have that's so nice after our service is, like prayers or concerns, and then even a way for people to just kind of comment or reflect on the service, as it had happened. And we see when I hear you describing the main different aspects of being a pastor, we see this same spirit continuing of everyone being involved, like you said in the fall meeting of here's kind of the idea that we have. What do you think? How is your feedback? How is this? Is this seeming like something that is nourishing for you and also for the congregation and for the church and for the community? And um, if so, how do you feel that way? And if not, how could we make it more so for all of these different areas? And then I love checking in again in springtime. How are we doing? What shall we continue this course, or go in this way direction? And then, like you say, now working with the visioning team, redefining, thinking of the idea of church as if something that is defined fluidly, within a context, within the what is happening now, in our world, in our city, in our community, in our congregation, using that as a way to define church, and what a church is, and then bringing it to the people and the congregation and saying, is this how you and also envision what it means to be a part of church, and what a church is? And I love having this idea of what it means to be a pastor, like filling in all of a lot of the gaps that maybe I had in what I thought it meant to be, and seeing this new, fresh, richer definition of the role that you are in, and probably a lot of other pastors as well. And it's been really, really rewarding for me to hear this today. And I'm curious if you have any other um, anything else that you wanted to touch on, or any questions or any final comments that you wanted to share before wrapping up today.
I probably would just say that I feel gratitude too for hearing your story and seeing that teaching itself is a very rich calling and vocation, and the way that you're able to do it in Japan too, where you're um, it's an intercultural expression of teaching, and so there's all these other interesting things going on um, that are involved with that, and how you're relating it to your research, and it just seems like a very rewarding uh, calling, and I'm grateful because I've known parts of your story um, about it, because we've talked a lot before about how's it going with teaching, but it was nice to hear it laid out today in the way you did. So I think it's really important for the various parts of ourselves as much as possible to be fed and be integrated into what we're doing. So the fact that your creativity and your interest in people and developing relationships, and your interest in research and academia are all being fed is really good. And I relate to that, because I feel that it's one of the things I love about ministry, because of the what I've shared in terms of having collegiality with other peers and people in the church, and being able to delve into texts and read context, and then the ability to build relationships and see that how it plays out in a community is really good. So I'm grateful too. And thank you so much for thinking of this topic, Barney. It was really neat to explore with you.
Yeah, and we would like to thank all of our listeners and all the people who are watching along. If you're watching along with us right now on YouTube, and we thank you for joining us. However that you are, it means a lot to us. Of course, we do this because we love it, but we also have the sense that that maybe the things that we say, the comments that we make here and there, the things that we talk about, maybe hopefully has an impact in a greater way, on a bigger scale for you listeners as well. And we hope that, especially from today, maybe you'll look at the work of the people around you in a different light. Maybe think about your own vocation, whatever it is you're up to, whether it's student, or if you're in between things, or if you are at the end of your career as a professional worker, whatever it may be. And we hope that maybe today's topic has given you some additional insight into the world around you as it is on this topic. And we hope that you are looking forward to our next episode, as we are as well. And for Barney and Jacob, this is the Two World Podcast, and we will see you again next time. Goodbye.